Welcome to the Theory of DFS podcast. I'm Jordan Cooper, the co-author of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass you could pick up at theoryofdfs.com. Joined back, as usual, with Neil Orfield after 3 weeks, right?
That's
So
been
I
a little
got
while.
Cardion. I went to WrestleMania, won a GPP while you were gone.
Yeah.
In
Oh yeah.
basketball. That was
The one
like
that
2 days after the last. I got to mention it because winning is the best marketing. So
I gave you shit because I said that you were duped. And what was funny,
someone pointed out I wasn't actually duped. Someone had a different. It was a 2v2 that had
yeah,
the same exact points.
yeah, but I wasn't gonna switch up the narrative. I
Right. That's
enjoyed
right.
calling you out as a dupe bro. Yeah,
No, but the next week on the MMA slate, I had a 26-way dupe win.
yeah.
So that's a bit more egregious.
But you still made some money on it.
Yeah. I ended up making 5,000 total
Yeah,
on the slate. I mean
not the
that
worst.
yeah, that's what I mean. I'm not gonna have all uniques. I'm aiming for under fives more than uniques. And if I end up with some that aren't as unique, then that's the that's the cost of doing business. I
Yeah.
guess it's not like I'm rooting against myself. It's like, oh no, I can't win with a 26-way tie, right? So I might as well lose. It's like no, at that point I'd rather win.
So I over the past week I've been talking to somebody reached out to me on Twitter. I think as a result of our last conversation where I was talking about how I wanted you to look into whether my MMA lineups are actually plus EV. Because I left like $600 on the table, and you were saying like you had looked at some that were leaving 1,500 on the table, and they were not plus EV. So he kind of sent me simulations that he had done. He's another MMA 150 maxer. Seems
Okay.
like a really sharp guy. I have no idea exactly how much value to give to the simulations that he's run, but he seems really sharp. So I tend to think that it's probably
Okay,
accurate.
well, which I'm fine. I mean, I'm fine. I want to learn from better players, and
Yeah, yeah. So
obviously
I thought,
the process that I was using is not simulation based. It's just all by going with odds and estimates, and
yeah.
just like if
So
this lineup is this way, and how often does this. How up basically what I'm doing is using the betting lines to determine can all six of these fighters score 100 plus points,
yep,
and how often do they score 100 plus points within a 50K salary cap? So, like, obviously, leaving, like, if you take all the six biggest underdogs, how often do they win and then still score enough points that it ends up
right,
being optimal? But I'm doing it
yes,
purely based on this fictional, like, they have to, because
right,
some
right.
slates, it's 556 total, and that's the winner. I mean, on lower scoring slates, and I'm not
Yep.
really accounting for any of those types of things.
Right. So he was doing actual simulations to look at the data, and it sounded like he, in some ways, used a lot of the same information, the same calculations that you did. And this is he had looked at a slate that was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and my overall lineups were negative EV according to what he had done. But I also could see other pros in there, and yours did fairly well. You were near the top in terms of maybe top 10 or so in terms of his according to his simulations, his like groups of all the different pros, 150 maxers, whether their lineups were plus EV. So I don't remember which exact slate it was. It was maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, but it looked like you were doing pretty well there. So what you're doing, even according to him, I mean, and the results are speaking for themselves to some extent that your lineups are plus EV. But I've got
And,
my
and
work
I'm
cut out
typically
in
entering
MMA.
150, so I mean he's
Yeah,
probably tracking. Sometimes some slates I maybe when I see that getting unique enough, like on 11 fight slates, 10 fights, I may not put 150. I may do 75 or something, where it's like I'm just gonna run. I'm gonna run into trains too much to
yep,
even try doing this. Rather than let me leave 3,000 on the table until like all these lineups and just like if a 49-5 plus lineup wins, it's like I'm basically losing all my money.
yeah. And that, I mean, that was my strategy going into it. Was I'm just going to leave money on the table, get unique. I figured MMA is random enough that it was sort of like NFL Showdown, that those lineups that leave a lot of salary on the table were just about as likely to win, but not as likely to be played. But clearly, that is not the case. The salaries actually mean something in MMA and sort of account for the likelihood of putting up 100 plus points on DK. So I think I need to go back to the drawing board. Clearly,
And a decision I made on this past MMA slate was a $37,000 swing on one decision. But I mean, I'm not gonna take it back because I think I do that anyway. It's the byproduct of my more blunt, directionally accurate approach. So
Yep.
you played the pay-per-view card because those are
I did. I was I was visiting my wife's sister and her husband in DC. And we were just moving around. I thought I might have more time. I ended up having about half an hour total to do it. So it was trying to get a little bit different than what I had been doing because I had seen that my past MMA constructions were not plus EV overall. I don't know yet the results of this one. I know that I didn't make money, but I did it in about half an hour. So probably again I was negative EV, but who knows?
well on this past slate was interesting because in generating lineups, I saw that if you were going to play three 9K fighters, so like if you wanted to play Volkanovski, Yan, and Chimaev, the two main event favorites, and the wrestling heavy big favorite, in the 3 round fights, like
Yep.
the amount of combinations of that was like a joke, right? So it's I'm none of these are going to be under fives. Like none, like these are more likely to be 50 pluses than under five. So it's a non-starter to play all three of them. Doesn't mean you can't play three 9K fighters. You play Arce, you play Gary, you play the ones that aren't going to be as popular because all the other ones are there. And then assessing the betting odds, it was another slate where the likelihood of the optimal using most of its salary was very high, right? When you have very heavy favorites
Yep.
and so it's like, okay, so most likely I'm not playing lineups that are like under 49K, maybe not even lineups under 49.5, unless I could find some lineups like that. And then the amount of high scoring dogs was low. Like maybe in the upper 7,500, like I like Madsen and Fremd and even K Hansen, but it still didn't allow you to like build like two 9K guys and then get like Hernandez or Malott in. Like you still couldn't build. You still had to take like a Mackenzie Dern. You had to take someone like that Olynyk Vanderoff fight. And those were more likely to be duped enough if you were playing two 9K. If you were playing Jan Volkanovski or Jan Chimiev or Volkanovski like I found those lineups to not be plus EV from a duplication standpoint. High win probability, but duplication standpoint. So I started generating a bunch of lineups. And I found that the most underowned fighters were Gary, Arce, Malott, whoever was Hernandez, because since a lot of people are jamming two 9K fighters higher than that, they were all coming in lower. Now Arce didn't have the greatest inside the distance line at 9,000. He probably was more times than not he scores like 80 there, and it's not good enough. But at like 8% ownership, like it's worth playing a bunch of them. But I also found that the main event, like the dogs, were also low probability of scoring 100 plus points. And in generating lineups, the most likely combination of fighters was going to be two main event fighters. So I built a build because I use my leverage score to build lineups that are properly leveraged and everything. I saw that unless I wanted to use a lot of Julio Arce or a lot of like Raquel Pennington, who didn't rate highly anyway because her ITD line was so low. If I wanted to just avoid 9K fighters altogether, I could get unique there. But the likelihood of none of the 9K fighters making 100 plus points was also very low. Right. So it's like one of those guys between the two main event favorites, Chimaev and Gary. The likelihood of one of them scoring 100 plus points was like 90 plus %. So it's like I probably got to build with that construction. So, but the problem with two main event fights is that a lot of lineups are going to have 2 main event fighters in it.
So 2 fighters going against each other?
No, there were 2 5-round fights.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's not. It wasn't one main event of 5 rounds. It's 2 5 rounds because it's 2 title fights.
Okay.
So I built 300 lineups that had 2 main event fighters. Now it could be the underdog. It could be Korean Zombie. It could be Aljamain Sterling. And then I built 300 that only had 1 main event fighter. So that the max is 1, and then in all lineups would only play 1 of Volkanovski, Yan, and Chimaev. Because once you play 2 of them at like $9,300 plus, the combinations of the other 4 fighters that you can put in your lineup, even if you leave $1,000, $1,500 on the table, was still going to be duped over 5, right? More likely than not. So that's why like leaving money on the table, especially in a high probability slate that it's going to be like 49.5 plus, I didn't want to build those lineups. So I built 300 of each. And then I started getting rid of what I deemed to be the more higher duplicative ones. Mm-hmm. And in my 300 set of only 1 main event fighter, a lot of them were good. In the one with 2 main event fighters, because remember, I'm the Volkanovski Yan combinations, I'm not playing, and the Volkanovski, like, I'm only playing 1 of those guys. So a lot of those lineups have Gary or Arce in it. Mm-hmm. And then also have, like, instead of, if I'm playing Volkanovski, it has Aljamain Sterling in it, right? So I'm going through all these lineups and eliminating, like, likely to be very much more duplicated than 5, and I'm eliminating a lot of them, right? I'm just going through nope. And then the ones that are not going to be as duplicated are ones where it's like, I'm playing Tisha Torres and Julio Arce, and I'm playing absurdly Contrarian, where the likelihood, like, I'm going to be unique with this lineup, but the probability of 600 in this lineup is also low. So I'm getting rid of.
Need this week, to be
what?
fair.
Right,
you
didn't need
it under 600 this week, yeah.
Right, but that's like my target of like
yeah.
How often does this fighter get 100 plus? So I started eliminating so many lineups from that set. And I saw that in my 300 set where it's only 1 main event fighter, like that was the key of like, if you only pick 1, if you pick no main event fighters, you know you're going to be unique. But the likelihood of that happening, it's like, no, there's enough 1 main event fighter lineups that I could pick 150 of these. Out of the 300, it's like I would play like 200 plus of these over. And the other 300 set, I'm eliminating like 250 of these lineups. Right? So you know what my decision was? My decision was, it's like, if that's going to be the case, I'm just going to make a 150 build from scratch that only has 1 main event fighter in it.
Okay.
Right? And just curtail it from, instead of trying to go from 600 down to 150, I'm getting rid of so many of these 2 main event fighter lineups. Do I want to play 40% Korean Zombie? No. Do I want to play 40% Aljamain Sterling? No, I don't, because those were the unique, yep. And then it's like Aljamain Sterling with Julio Arce, and I'm looking like, how many of these types of lineups do I even want to play to begin with? And I'm like, nah, I'm just going to stick with 1 main event fighter. And based on my leverage scores, the optimal lineup I would have had in my 150 set. Right? I would, and it was a 6 or 7 way split for like 37,000. If I was involved in that, it would have came down to like 32 or something. And like, because I didn't have 2 main events, only 2 dogs won, right? Yeah. And one of them was Sterling. So, like, It was Madsen, Sterling. Those are the only 2 underdogs that won.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
Right? And it was a low scoring. There was only 3 finishes on the entire slate. So, like, I'm looking at that lineup going, based on all the, I was way over on Olynyk. I would like all the fighters in that lineup. I was over. I was over on there. I had that exact lineup, but with Chimaev instead of Volkanovski. Why? Because I could only have 1 main event fight. I have Sterling Chimaev lineups, but I can't have Sterling Volkanovski lineups because it's 2 main event fighters. But Volkanovski and Chimaev's leverage score in my model, or whatever you want to call it, was only the difference of 0.02 points, which means I know that in the top 150. I would have gotten it, right? But I'm saying, but it's that one, like, there are tons of plus EV lineups that you could make. It's a matter of what 150 or what 20, what 5, what 3, what 1 that you're going to play. And a lot of times you find that you have 300, 400 lineups that it's like, I'd love to play them all if I could, but I can't. So I have to find some way of mixing this down. And it's like, how much Tisha Torres do I want? Right? Like, do I want to have 17% of Tisha Torres when her likelihood of hitting 100 plus is so low? Yes, she's low owned or whatever, but yes, I'll have 4 out of 150 instead of like 22 out of 150 for the sake of being like uniquer. It's like, so like that was the problem with like why I was getting rid of so many lineups from that set. But I don't think I made I don't think I made a mistake. It's just that there were going to be more plus EV lineups with only one main event fighter. And from a diversification standpoint, I just said, I'll take the higher variance and not diversify by 120 out of my 150 being with one main event fighter and 30 with, an up and down with Yan, Korean Zombie, or Volkanovski, Sterling. I'll take 30 more lineups that only have one main event fighter because they're more likely to be unique.
Right. Yeah. Good process over results, right?
Unlike your process, which is like change some settings and press the button.
Nope, no process, no results so far.
Right, because the optimal lineup that split 6 ways was a 49-8 lineup.
Yeah, I allowed 49-8 this time.
Right.
So I could have theoretically gotten to that lineup. I just,
But you'll see a lot of 150 max. I mean, I look and you'll see 150 maxers that they have. It's 150 lineups. They have 137 under 5 dupes and 110 uniques, and the highest salary they have in their lineup is like 49.2 or something. Yeah, they have nothing past there.
Which is what I had been trying until you kind of talked me out of it.
Those are. I mean, it's just that some of those lineups are negative EV, and the lineups that are plus EV are extremely high variance. I mean, they're just like when they win, they will be unique. It's just that they don't win that all the EV like comes from the 1 in 3 years that lineup wins or something. How many of those types of lineups do you want to have in your set? Because what if like on a slate like yesterday where 2 main event fighters win and a 49.8K type of lineup wins, it's like you're putting in $37.50 and you're getting back like $400.
Right.
Like that's exactly what it's going to be. So if you don't mix in and care more about the under 5s than the uniques, you're going to be put in a position where you're going to be blown through even on a $15 entry slate, which is $22.50. You're going to be blowing through like $1,500 a slate easily, like for weeks upon months.
Yep.
And if you're willing to do those bounces, I mean, those lineups are,
and a lot of 150 maxers are. I mean, I typically would say that I am too. I'm willing to weather that storm a little bit with like NFL Showdown. I put in a lot of uglier lineups because I know that when they hit, they're going to hit big. So it's sort of the same idea, but it seems like the timeline is even larger for MMA, or maybe I just think that because I'm pretty new to MMA and don't really know what I'm doing. And NFL, I watch the games. I kind of know what's going on. I kind of know what needs to happen for things to go my way. Whereas with MMA, I'm kind of going in blind a little bit.
Well, I mean, to me, it lines up with the context of a slate. Yeah. As I've said before, I prefer the slates where the biggest favorite is like minus 240 or something. It's it's a 15 fight card, and it's like, this is a slate where it's a much higher probability, still not the most probable, but a much higher probability that a lineup that only spends like 48.3 is the optimal, and you can build a lot of more unique lineups there because the fights are closer. You don't have guys where it's like I don't know how much of this guy I could even play. He's like a plus 550 underdog with an ITD line of plus 700.
You're talking about the upcoming slate?
No, I'm talking about slates in general of just like when we have these slates where the fights are closer. The slate coming up this week. I mean, the pricing just came out, but I see the odds. But it's a lot of untrustworthy fighters on the slate to begin with. So those are more where I will run the win probabilities and see it's like, oh, 48 eights, 48 sixes are still lower probability, but still closer than
Yeah.
then it's like, oh, you don't need a 9, like it's one of those slates where there's 4 9K fighters and there's like a 30% chance like none of them get there.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, those are the slates where now I may still have 50K type of lineups, but that are going to be more contrarian with the other spots. But now I'm building. Now I make these 150, 300 builds where it's like, okay, let me make 150 lineups that have max 49K. Let me make max 49 5K, max 50, and then start picking and choosing. Some I go down as low as, let's say, max 48 5 and start looking at those and then building from, and then seeing what bits and pieces I could find from each and go, okay, now a lot of times I'm doing that just to see, and then I build my 150 from like, okay, now I know what types of lineups that I need to get, and on those slates I need to separate the builds, because if I leave max at the 50K and let it run, I may only get like 10 to 20 lineups that are under 49K with my leverage scores anyway, and I may want more of them. But on slates like we just had, where most likely I'm playing lineups that use most of the salary anyway, like I don't need to do that. I mean, I was like, okay, I see what I need to do and run it from there.
It seems to me that MMA, more than other sports, you get out what you put in to some extent. Like the more time you put in trying to get unique with lineups that still have a high probability, the more you're going to get out of it. I mean, I guess that's true to some extent with.
I think Showdown. I think NFL Showdown also. I think that
yeah, NFL Showdown for sure is that way too. But I feel maybe I just feel that way because with NFL Showdown I understand it. It's something that I have played for a long time. Whereas with MMA, the fight. I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
Yep, I could hear.
Okay. I was totally frozen. You were totally frozen on my screen, so I don't know what was going on there.
Let it go.
Yeah, still here.
So you were saying about NFL show, like you feel like you understand the game more. Is there what's the things that I quote? I'm putting it in quote. Understand about MMA doesn't have to do with like understanding the actual sport of MMA.
Sure.
But it should. I mean, I'm it's all betting lines to me.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's not like work that you need to study tape or anything. It's more of the time investment. Like it's obvious over the past 6 to 8 months that I've sat down and said I'm going to devote time to really understanding context and slate dynamics for MMA.
Yep.
So I could get better, and I could do that in any sport. I could do it in golf or anything like that. It's just that in looking at the CSVs the past almost 2 years, just I in everything that I've looked at, the edge is just. I mean, the same thing for NFL Showdown. Truthfully, also, just the edge is just too big not to devote the time to.
Right. So here's what I think I understand about NFL Showdown that I don't understand about MMA is NFL Showdown has a lot of correlation to it, and I also understand where the field makes mistakes with those correlations. So I build in some slightly negative correlation that I know the field isn't going to do, where I can get a lot of leverage just based on the field not playing the quarterback against the opposing defense, for example, that kind of thing, or 2 running backs from the same team, 3 running backs sometimes from the same team. The field never does that. If you do it a little bit, sometimes you can gain some EV just by getting different in ways that I know like kind of the probabilities of that hitting. Whereas with MMA, it's hard for me to just the lowest owned fighter is 8% owned, and it's like, yeah, if you just build lineups with an 8% owned and a 15% owned fighter in it, you can get different. And it's hard for me to kind of conceptually grasp that because those don't seem like really low ownerships on a card where there's only 24 total fighters. So it's like
right, but it is, but
like
the combinations, right? That it seems. I mean, because we had on this past card 3 fighters that were 50+% owned.
Right.
So it's like, to me, once you play all 3, like how many combinations of the last 3 fighters especially with the salary ranges. Could you like I can't see possibly playing any of these lines. Yeah, if you want to split with 74 people, okay, go for it. It's the slates that are a little bit harder are the ones where like nothing stands, like where the highest owned fighter is 40%, and then it's like a whole bunch of like 30s, like it's a little bit flatter.
Mm-hmm.
But on the slates where it's much more barbelled, it's just to me it's easy intuitively to see what lineups not to play, and I think that's a lot of half the battle in contests like NFL Showdown or any showdown, like a very limited player pool types of things. Of it's if you're first diving into it, it's more important to figure out the slate context for what lineups not to play than what lineups to play. Because once you, it's easier to start from, okay, here's 100 lineups that I don't even have to run a simulation to know that this is going to be duped 10, 20, 50, who knows how many times. And then once you get past there, you've already won half the battle. I mean, now you're getting to the point where it's like, oh, I have a lineup that was duped 26 ways. That's one of them. But I mean, I also have lineups that are duped 8 ways. I have 34 lineups that are duped, 4 ways, 3 ways. I have, 18 uniques. It's like, I'm more likely to get plus EV lineups that way and then avoid the ones where 184 people have the same lineup, or the mistakes that people make, like on slates where all the favorites win and a main event underdog is in a stack is the winner. I just don't win those, because if you download the CSVs, by default, every time that I've looked, those lineups are overowned
with the stack of the main
event. Right, of the main event. Because people are like, oh, I'm guaranteed points or whatever like that. And a lot of times, especially when the main event, the underdog is very low priced, where it's like, dude, if this goes to decision and this guy gets like 54 points, like if all the 9K fighters put up 100 plus, like essentially the only way to get those in is by playing the cheapest underdog, and as long as no other underdogs win and score, 80 plus points, that is going to be optimal. Now, it doesn't mean you can't play those lineups. It's just that by default they're overowned. So I automatically never stack. We've seen there was one slate. I think the slate that I won on. There was one slate where no one had the optimal, and it would have been a stack of one of the 3-round fights. Okay. Where it was I forgot who it was one where one of the guys like dominated the hell out of the first 2 rounds grappling with like 5 takedowns and tons of control time and 100 ground strikes, and then got knocked out in the 3rd round, and the guy that knocked him out ended up with it was like a mid-range fight. It was something where like the guy that lost actually scored more points than the guy that won.
Wow. And
then based on the scoring of the slate, it would have been spending $50K and having those 2 people, like the 8,300, 7,900 would have won, right?
Yeah. So I want to interject.
But no one had it. That's the case. But I'll never do that.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I've been talking to this guy who runs simulations for MMA, and he suggested that on shorter slates, I believe, he thinks that stacking sometimes goes a little bit underowned.
That's correct.
Aside from the main event, which he said is usually appropriately owned, was the way he described it to me.
Right, on so 9 fight cards where tons of cancellations. But typically those are the slates where I don't play 150 lineups. Like I just instead of playing those types of lineups where I'm stacking 3-round fights and doing very weird stuff, I'd rather just say, instead of me trying to find 150 that I want to play, let me just play 50 or let me just play 75 and stuff like that. And just by default, never stack, right? But I see on some slates where it's like, heavy favorites and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this is more likely, but anytime I've downloaded CSVs, typically on like 13, 14 fight cards, 12 fight cards, like you see too many main event like if there's one 5-round fight. Typically
So
the
don't you
two
think that is a scenario where it might help to know the fighters a little bit to understand which fights have a better stacking probability, like where the stack could be optimal?
Oh yeah, you could do
'Cause
that by the
like,
betting. I mean, the betting lines
by the
could
betting, like, I suppose.
typically the fights to target. I mean, you probably have to know a little bit about the fighters. I mean, typically the fights that have very high inside the distance probabilities, that the fight
Okay,
doesn't
'cause
go.
they're not going to be both optimal if it is not inside the distance. If it comes to a decision, there's like
Right,
not
a high, like it's more of like high paced fight. Like what you really want in the main event if you stack is a 5-round close decision. See, this whole thing all depends on the pricing, right?
Sure.
Like the hardest slates are when the harder slates. I'm not saying the hardest slates. When the main event is like a $9,400, $6,800 fight, those are easier because all you're considering when the spread is that wide is the likelihood of the $9,400 fighter outscoring the other 9K fighters. So it's like if that fighter is like the highest priced fighter on the slate, like all I need is one of the lower fighters to outscore him or two of the lower fighters to outscore. Like what's the likelihood of main event favorite gets 112, but I find two fighters that get 120 that are underneath that I don't need that. So, and then on the bottom end, all I need to really care about is winning. I mean, I don't even like at that low price.
Yeah.
Really don't care. But if that fight goes the distance and is competitive, what ends up happening is that the $9,400 fighter is not optimal, and the underdog could be optimal with like a 60-point score, but
Right.
with a 90-point score from the favorite, probably not.
Right.
So essentially, when you play if you're gonna stack those types of fights, it's much less likely unless no other underdog wins and the underdog puts up enough of a fight where maybe 40 points from the lowest priced fighter could make the optimal. But you would need the high price guys to do really, really well. Okay? But the harder ones are when the main event is like the $8,200, $8,000 fight. Where the main event is like a minus 115 plus 105 type of fight. Yeah. Where like this is even. Yeah. Those are great fights to stack in like cash games. Because you're pretty much guaranteeing yourself like probably 150 points possibly from both fighters. And those are the fights where if it's a high-paced decision, you could end up with both guys scoring somewhere between 60 and 90 points.
Right.
And that could be, for their prices, that may be fine. Right? You get one dog that smashes 120, and then two 9K guys that put up 120. Then how else do you fit that in without, sometimes we have winners that, I mean, Mackenzie Dern won and got 55 points. Right? Gary got 61 points. I mean, so like dude, if an $8,000 fighter that gets like 68 in a loss, that could be fine. Or like an $8,400, $7,700, $7,800, like there are more ways for that type of stuff to happen. Yeah. But to me, is that knowing about MMA? It's just, to me, it's just
right.
It's just studying slates over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And obviously simulation. I'm assuming the person you talk to could probably do much better than me in simulating those and going, I'm going to simulate this slate 10,000 times and show me how many times, percentage of times that what type of construction wins. Is it a 2-9K construction? Is it a non-9K construction? Is it a stack? Is it a like whatever type of thing? I'm just kind of doing that more intuitively, or at least
Right.
using the betting lines as a proxy of
Right.
what that would possibly be. And we just so happen to be on a stretch of cards where we get multiple major favorites in the 9K range, where it's like, I guess I'm not leaving much salary on the table, but I know for a fact, because I'm looking at 150 maxers every slate, that a ton of them aren't have obviously are not doing what I'm doing. There's some that are, or some that I don't know what they're doing, but they're not. They'll have lineups that have 50K. They also have lineups that have 47.5 in them, and they'll have a
Right.
mix across the spectrum. But I also find 150 maxers where, like, they're playing every lineup they can, 48.5, between 47.8 and 48.5.
Yep.
And then it is what it is, like, type of thing. And then a 49.7 lineup wins, and they're fucking busted.
Yep.
And that's why once I kept on seeing, like, it's like I respect these guys play. Like, I'm not convinced that just constantly playing these types of lineups necessarily is plus EV, because they're getting tons of uniques. It's like, is it worth being unique? And I look at my lineups and it's like, well, this lineup is only duped 3 times. This lineup is duped 4 times. Like, I get some uniques, I get some with 2s, some with 7s. Like, and I'm looking in that range and going, how often does my lineup win duped 4 times versus their lineup win solo based on the context as a slate? And I'm finding that based on what I'm doing in Excel with the win probabilities and my proxy of 100 plus, like a 600 point score,
Which seems good enough. I mean,
right? Seems good. It seems good enough.
Yeah.
That my lineups are more profitable than their lineups. Even splitting 100K, it's 150. It's like 190K divided. It's like $48,000. How often do I win $48,000 versus them winning 100,000 or something? And I win more than twice the amount of the time.
Yeah.
So
I will
it's like,
say, so based on the simulations that I looked at, like I said, of this other guy who was doing actual simulations, seems very sharp. He's finding the same thing that you are, and I was negative EV. My lineup set was pretty negative EV, and there were some really great players, some players that I really respect as DFS players who were more negative EV than mine were. So,
and did you know, like, the reason why they were negative EV? Was it because of, was it primarily because of duplication?
No, they were all like low dupes. I think it was just the frequency with which they win was why they were negative.
Because that's really the balance that we're talking about.
That you're coming
right,
to.
right.
Yeah. So it is the players that, like, they're taking big risks. So they're players probably similar to myself, I think, that are just willing to take pretty big risks. And in other sports that can work out, but I guess in MMA, maybe they just haven't figured it out yet. Sort of similar to myself, just it's a work in progress, I'm sure.
Right, because that would be a big difference. Like, if you're playing high win probability lineups that just happen to be duped 20, 30, 40 times, that's, and then the other side of the spectrum is like what you're doing is you're playing tons of uniques. If we relate this to NFL Showdown, there's the one end of the spectrum is playing both, like, the lineup that it's like both quarterbacks, the underpriced running back and captain, like the lineup that you go around the entire industry, that's like, you're going to see half the lineups and double ups look like exactly like this lineup. Like, that would be the one extreme. Like, don't play the lineup that you download and it's literally duped 4,200 times in the large field contest. And then there's the other way of, like, I'm going to play all the $200 players.
Right.
Right? And it's like, yes, I have 150 uniques, and you have almost no shot of ever being profitable enough to ever get your money back at all.
I enjoyed listening to, so I re-listened to your episode of Theory of DFS with Nerdy Tenor, of course, leading up to
you did the episode you did, high stakes. I mean, truthfully, I think that was your best episode, and I think Nerdy Tenor one on mine was my best episode.
He's just fascinating.
No, but see, the thing is that what he does is not unique or any, conceptually, it makes sense of what he does. It's not like he's crazy or anything like that. I just enjoy, especially coming from a poker background, the way that he describes problems and the mindset of how he approaches things is very similar. It's like I'm looking at someone going like, it feels like I'm doing exactly what you're doing, but I'm trying to do it like with my own brain,
Right.
and you program a computer to do it
You just
that
tell the
way,
computer to do it for you. Yeah.
right? So I like hearing him, like, he explains it in a way where it's like it semi validates like like
Yeah.
like the fact that, like, finding, like, I brought this up like almost like 4 or 5 years ago, and I kept on talking about efficient ownership. Right? I'm not saying that I invented anything. Okay, I understand. I'm not, this is not me. Whatever like
Sure.
that. But I just constantly said there has to be a way to figure out how owned the player should be,
Right.
and then once you figure that out, and then you can figure out what the field is going to do and exploit that. I mean, that, like, to me, it seemed obvious to me. I had no methodology of really how to do that, other
Right.
than feel, other than running lineups and seeing what shows up more often than not, and then going, yeah, based on this projection, he should be on this slate probably like 30-ish% owned. And then I look at projected ownership and he's like 14% owned.
Right.
And I'm
I
like,
mean, that's what the boom bust essentially does, or like
right.
the
Well,
top section.
the boom bust is only going by, well, the optimal number
Optimal percent. Optimal
right,
rate.
right, because that encapsulates salary and
Yeah,
position,
exactly.
right? Because that's the main thing.
And the rest of the slate. Yeah.
Right, and the rest of the slate. It's not just like a smash rating where it's like, oh yeah, he scores X amount of points X amount of times. It's like,
Right.
well, you can't fit 10K players in an NBA lineup, so like
Right.
it doesn't matter if they're the highest. That you can't even make that lineup. So, but just the concept of what is of he's trying to solve that problem of, like, how do I figure out what the efficiency of of ownership of a player, and what the optimal frequency of a lineup in this contest is, and conceptually that, I mean, essentially is what I've always been trying to
Right.
do in general. And like 5 years ago, I obviously don't know as many people, back then didn't know as many people in the industry that I do now. But once I started talking to more serious players or whatever like that, it felt like people didn't even understand what I was doing. Like, back then there were so many people that, I'm talking about sharper players.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't even care about ownership. I just, I have better projections, and I'm just going to jam in my projections, and whatever happens happens.
Yeah.
And I come from the perspective of like there has, like, the concept of relative value has to exist here. Points that I get that you don't have to be more valuable. Like, it doesn't make sense otherwise. So why would you want to play like that the bare basic example that I give people, and it's in the course, of like two players, same position, same everything, same projection, but one is 10% owned and one is 30% owned. Which guy should you play?
Right.
Well, the problem is you play the 10% owned guy. So, like, if that is clearly the correct answer, then there has to be a range where once you decrease and increase the price,
Right.
once you start decreasing owner, that there has to be some type of equilibrium point where this player at this projection, at this price, at this position, or whatever, is X, and this player is Y, and one is in a vacuum, player to player, more plus EV than the other. Like that,
Right.
if you could clearly state that you'd rather play the same projection player at 3 times less ownership, you can't then say that ownership doesn't matter.
Right.
It clearly does, right? Because you'd rather have the points that other people don't have. So like that, like, not, there's a roundabout way to say that, like, that's like Daniel, the way that he approaches it through computer programming. Like, I could listen to him talk for hours.
Yeah, he's fascinating. Me too.
So you're saying, so that to bring it back to what
So to bring it back to what I was saying to bring it up was, I found it fascinating re-listening to him talking about him looking through lineups to find the dead lineups, and the majority of the dead lineups came from over projected lineups that were too similar to everybody else. Like they were grouped together, the lumped together lineups, more so than the poorly projected lineups. Was something that I believe he said in his interview with you, is that a lot of the deadline, at least a lot of them, I think he said the majority, come from lineups that actually project really well. They're just lumped in with a bunch of very, very similar lineups.
Right. It's
In a large field PvP.
right. It's the people that are building lineups that have very high min cash equity, but
Yep.
much lower win equity. You're not going to find as many. Maybe you find more in NFL. Uh, you're not going to find many where it's like this lineup projects 70 points, like an NBA. This lineup projects 70 points lower than everyone else. Like you're just not going to find. You're really not going to find those lineups. It's going to be more of the these are the lineups that like it's one of the three lineups that everyone's playing in double ups.
Right.
It's like here's all the best plays of the day, and it's like good luck on your 1.5 or 2x. And then or people that play that lineup and then like I'm gonna pivot and instead of playing this $4,200 guy, I'm gonna play the other $4,200 guy that's 3% owned. And I always tell people it's like how that lineup wins if your 3% owned player puts up 50 points.
Right.
Because your other 7 spots are just that combination exists too much. That the only way that you could win, so you're betting basically the farm on that one player having an absurdly outlier result. Not like oh well he gets 8x. It's like no, you did like
He can't just outscore the other guy by 2 fantasy points.
right, exactly. He has to outscore the other guy by like 20 fantasy points.
Right.
Which makes it better that if you could find a lineup that projects similarly to that, but is a 4v4, so you don't have the same types of combos, the ownership could even be somewhat similar. Like that lineup would be better than. That's why the whole lineup's not players thing of like you could look and it's be different ownership, different anything. It's like, but this combo, we see this in MLB, right? We'll see combos like, well, it's a chords game that they forgot to price up, and the visiting team's coming in, and it's like everyone on this. There's 6 guys. There's 3 guys on this team that's going to be 30+% owned. There's 2 guys that are going to be 20+% owned, and there's a couple of guys. Then the bottom of the order is like 8 to 10% owned, and it's like well, I'm gonna play the 5 highest owned players from this stack, and based on the price, and then the 50% owned pitcher, and it's like, well, yeah, I got 4 other spots. It's like the combo of those 6 players that you have in your lineup. A lot of people have that same exact combo. So your other spots have to really outperform on a slate where that stack goes off. That you're better off if instead of playing that combo, fade the fucking team. At that point, you shouldn't play that. Like either don't play the chalky starting pitcher or build that team combo with like all bottom of the order guys. But the mistake, as with Nerdy Tenor, what his findings are is that too many people play lineups that are too correlated with your opponent's lineups,
right?
Rather than lineups that are just like how did you play these guys? These like you played the pirate stack with 3 9 hole hitters and a relief pitcher or something like those lineups. Like it's not 2012 anymore. Like
right.
You're not going to see that many of those lineups.
No. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Yeah, I agree. That it was fascinating listening to his episode again because I remember the first time listening to it and being like, he just said a lot of stuff that I have no idea what he even is talking about. And this time I didn't feel that way. I felt like maybe I've consumed enough content at this point that I have a better understanding of a lot of what he was talking. I mean, it's still a lot of it is obviously above my head and it's stuff that I can't do, but at least I understand what he's doing and what he's trying to do. And kind of what he meant as he was talking about it. So that was interesting.
Right. To me, the most important conceptual thing, because I typically deal in concepts.
Yeah.
That was introduced. The way that he described it in the previous episode of Theory of DFS is that exploitative versus balanced.
Yep.
Type of thing. So like that's why I appreciated when Daniel said. That he doesn't like the term game theory optimal. Because I'm of a very similar opinion. What does that mean? Like it means it really means balance. It really means as close to the Nash equilibrium as possible. It doesn't mean that it's the best. It just means that you cannot be exploited. That's really what GTO means. It means
which is why I had been confused about it. So I learned on when Brick was on High Stakes that GTO was not the same thing as exploitative because I had assumed that that's what people meant when they said GTO was exploitative because to me that is the best way to play. Now who's to say what is actually the best way to play? But I had assumed that they meant like using game theory the most optimal decision, which to me would be exploitative.
Right.
So I had assumed that when people said game theory optimal, they meant exploitative, that those are kind of interchangeable terms, or at least that GTO or that exploitative was encompassed within GTO was kind of how I had thought it was. But so I agree with you that it's sort
Right.
of
Well, I mean, if you study game theory, I mean, the popular, the prisoner's dilemma, it's like making a decision that renders your opponent's decision meaningless, where they can't possibly exploit you, is the usage of game theory to be
right.
optimal, right? To make it in if you're playing rock paper scissors, right? If you randomly threw rock paper and scissors 1/3 of the time, you can't be exploited. It doesn't mean you're going to win or anything, but you're going to benefit by your opponent throwing one too often than the other. So over the course of time, you're going to win as long as you could randomly equally 33% of the time. Like even if you just did random.org, right, and just did 1 to 3, and you were able to do that, and that's based your decisions on that, and obviously didn't give off any type of tell or I'm getting like if you can't see like those types of things. All you're doing is making it so that if your opponent knew your strategy and goes, he's going to randomly throw rock, paper, scissors equally 1/3 of the time, what can I do to beat this guy? There's no way to exploit that whatsoever. Yeah. At best, it's going to be a stalemate, right? But if I knew that you threw rock twice as often as anything else, then obviously I'm throwing paper. I'm trying to now shift my frequency to exploit that.
Yes.
Right? So if I knew, for instance, if I knew that you were going to throw rock twice as often as any of the others, what you could essentially throw paper 100% of the time and make money.
Yep.
Right? That's the extremely exploitative strategy of like, now I could switch. Now you get into second level thinking. Now, if my opponent starts seeing that I'm throwing paper 100% of the time, if they're observant, they may start throwing scissors at a higher frequency now, right? They're throwing scissors at a higher... I'm constantly throwing paper, and now they're going scissors, and it's like, okay, now his frequency of rock has now come down, right? And now my strategy is actually negative EV because they've adjusted, and now I start throwing rock to combat scissors, right? Maybe it could be that my opponent is like, well, if he's always going to throw paper, I'm always going to throw scissors, and then I start throwing rock, and he keeps on throwing scissors, and I keep up, and then how does his frequency change? So you're constantly on an unobservant opponent. Once you find how the frequency changes, you could be more profitable by exploiting that until the point. But obviously, people aren't now in those types of games that we're talking about. It's very simple games. People aren't dumb. Once they see that you're going to be throwing like 20 times in a row, they're going to start adjusting, right? And also, it's very hard visually without some tracking method of knowing that someone throws rock twice as often. You'll probably be able to notice if they throw it 5 times as often, right? Because that. So like it's an unrealistic, real life type of problem.
Sure.
But to me, like when he mentioned that he wants to create like toy game type of tools.
Yeah.
It's like that's now we're getting into the crux of what this is the shit that I like.
Yes.
Right? These are like the conceptual things of like yes, I could see, and it's very similar. 95% of people will look at the thing that he creates and goes, I don't understand the point of this. Right? What am I going to learn about DFS here? And like 5% of people I'm part of that 5% is like, this will help me, and like,
yeah.
This is the stuff that's like, yes. And like I created some Excel spreadsheets. I've done on the pregame show some like like very basic things of like, well, if
You
you
mentioned
change your
that. Yeah.
frequency and you like those types, and like to me that shows the concepts where it's not like, well, on this slate, do I play a high price pitcher? Like, let's just like
Yeah.
if you grasp the mentality of how to think,
And that's Brick 75 did some of that in
right?
his videos, his DFS playlist. He does some of those kind of games with using Excel to kind of show you those like little concepts that you can learn a lot from. So I find those kind of things fascinating. I'm also in that 5% who's like, yeah, that'll be really fun to kind of see what he comes up with for that. And I imagine that a lot of viewers of or listeners to the Theory of DFS podcast are of the same mind that kind of stuff is useful, I would think.
Right. Right. He mentioned that before, and I even offered. I was like if you have no place to put it, like I'll put it on the Theory DFS site. I mean, because that's like
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's that's the type of thing that I would want to create myself also. Right. It's like how do I make these little interface, and it's like you move this and you move that. What happens with the different payout structure? Put in the payout structure that the contest, and then run. It's like if I play this guy more than that guy, like I can't code the back end to do that type of stuff, but I mean I can make I could design the interface or whatever for that type of thing. But even with like I did one with like marbles, like you have to pick a like how many marbles are in the bag, the probability of one marble coming out. Here's the payout structure of guessing the right marbles in a row. Like it's like, well, if you knew that seven, it's 4, 3, 2, 1. Red 4 but out of your 10 opponents, 6 are picking red. And you don't know any other information, which is the more profitable marble to pick. Because, like, it could be that 4 pick, red, green, blue, yellow. And it's like, well, it could be that 6 red, 4, 3 blue, and you. It's like, at that point, you pick green because there's 2 of them versus 1 yellow, right? But if you don't, like, what happens if you only know one? Let's say you only know your friends in the contest, right? And they're colluding or something like that. And, like, that they're going to pick X color. So now you have that piece of information. So now the probabilities of your 8 other opponents now move up by what 2.5% or something, something equally because you don't know. And then if you also know that this other bad player that always the highest, the cash game players, right? That type of like, oh, they're picking red. It doesn't matter, and like, okay, now we don't know 6 of your opponents. Like now, what's the optimal like? With that information, because those types of problems is what you're doing in poker. Essentially, right. you have information that backdated information of how your opponents play, more likely than not, and then you're just trying to combine all these things together by going, what is the optimal? When I say optimal, it's like what is the highest EV moves? Do I bet here? Do I raise here? How much do I bet? Right? And then once you start adding in more opponents, then now you're layering more stuff on top of it.
Yep.
And when you do it in poker, especially if you're like a live poker player, like you're just, if you're playing full time, I was playing 6+ days a week, 8+ hours a day, like 30+ hands an hour. You get in that, that's all you could think in the terms of. And that's why you mention on high stakes so often that you ask that anyone have do you have a statistical background or whatever like that, and then typically it's like do you have a background in poker,
right?
And it's really not a coincidence that so many professional poker players, good profitable poker players, are also good at DFS.
No, very similar mindset.
Or vice versa. You should play some poker.
Yeah, but it's not legal here, or I don't think, to play like online. I guess right. There's a card there's a card room in Minneapolis, right? I don't want to leave my house. What are you talking about?
Okay. Well, me
neither.
You
know what I didn't ask Nerdy Tenor about that I had thought about, but I didn't want to force him to answer, and I had the idea late. So he mentioned you brought up that you wanted him to backtest. He said he might backtest for you whether it is better to exclude at least one outfielder from your stack. So you had said that you, for a while, were building in your stacks, telling it to exclude at least, not play 3 outfielders from the same team.
Right.
And I was curious to hear, because he mentioned on the podcast with you that he was like, yeah, maybe I'll look into that. It's not something that I build in, but maybe the Sims do it for me.
Right.
And I was curious. I would think that it would be then exclude at least one. Aren't first basemen essentially interchangeable with outfielders in MLB DFS? Am I wrong in thinking that? Like I think of first baseman as being like sort of similar. Like they're also going to hit 40 home runs with 100.
It's I'm talking about, this is not a FanDuel problem, by the way, because FanDuel has a utility spot.
Right.
It's just that you have 3 outfield spots. You only have 1 first base spot. So the concept that I'm intuitively thinking about is that if for instance, let's put away positional, people that have multiple positional eligibility aside. If you're playing Paul Goldschmidt and I'm playing Pete Alonso, if Paul Goldschmidt hits 2 home runs and Alonso hits 2 home runs, no one can have both of them.
Right.
Because you only have 1 first base spot, and they're both first base only. So like as long as you have one of them, you're probably you don't need both. On FanDuel, you may need both because there's a utility spot there.
Right.
So if there's 2 second basemen that put up a lot of points, you can't have both of them. In the outfield, however, you have 3 spots. So if 3 outfielders put up and they're owned decently enough, like it's going to be like, what's the likelihood of 3 outfielders from the same team being the top 3 scoring outfielders on the entire slate?
Right.
And then what's the probability of there being 1 outfielder that you need that you need to have has the 38-point game? Yep. That a 5-man stack, you'd rather have 4-3-1 with that one guy. You'd rather have a 5-man stack with that outfield spot open because there's so many more outfielders. It's very similar to, we think in terms of like on a 15-game MLB slate, you stack 5-man because the likelihood of one of these teams scoring like God knows how many runs is much higher because there's so many more teams playing versus a 4-game slate where maybe the highest scoring team only scores 5 runs because there's only 4 games on the slate. I view that the same with outfielders of, it's a 10-game slate, 20 teams, let's say they have 3 outfielders each, that's 60 outfielders, there's 3 spots. If you have 20 first basemen, but you could only play 1. So it's like, what does it matter as much? But in the outfield, what is the likelihood of Mitch Haniger, Jared Kelenic, and Jesse Winker or whatever, like putting up enough points in the stack that instead of playing Haniger, if you would have played Kyle Schwarber, who had 3 home runs today, like this, how many more outfielders could have that 3 home run gag? So many more, especially outfield is a little bit more of a power position than shortstop or catcher or something. So like, I have no way of, I've no way of figuring that. I've tried to some extent. By like okay, let me go to the range of outcomes of all the outfielders and then doing basically a permutation problem of like, okay, 60 outfielders, here are their probabilities of scoring X amount of points, right? Because I can't do simulations, so I can't go optimal rates. It's just like, what's a target score? 30? Okay. What's the okay, this person 4% chance, this person 2.5%, and then just going through and going, based on all these probabilities, what's 3 from the same team? So and it came out so low.
Yeah.
That it's like, well, what's the likelihood of 3 what's the likelihood of 3 players scoring 30 plus points? And it would be like 17%. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, how many of that is 3 outfielders on the same team? Like less than 1%. Right. So it's like, intuitively, this makes sense that there's most likely going to be 1 outfielder as a one-off, especially if they're owned. I'm not talking about the 0.4% 8th hitter that happens in the lowest team total slate that they score so many runs that the stack, you'll need the stack at that point, right? For that type of guy, that it's not going to be a one-off in other lineups, but like these 3%, 4%, 5% owned guys, or obviously higher, 20% owned guy as a one-off, like you're gonna need him to win first.
Yeah.
So like that's the thinking behind that, right?
Yeah.
I
No, I think
can't
it makes
simulate it though.
Right. I think it makes sense, though. I think it would be interesting to hear whether he actually looked at it and see the results that he found. But I think that it does make sense. Obviously the baseball season, I've only played one MLB slate so far this year. I feel like I didn't get a ton of lineups that were three outfielders from the same team anyway, probably because of that, because the outfielders project better in general. So other outfielders from other teams would sneak into.
Well, it depends on Neil. It also depends on the team. I mean, like
Sure.
you play the Yankees. I mean, it's
right.
how good their outfielders. I mean, it compares to how good their outfielders are. The Angels, especially since Walsh is also first base eligible, you get Walsh, Ohtani, Trout, Rendon. I mean, the outfielders project better than a team that has like two of their outfielders bat 7th and 9th in the lineup because they're more speedster-ish type of. So you're not really gonna get those types. But when it's Judge, Stanton, Gallo, like you're more likely to get 3 Yankees outfielders than get 3 Pirates outfielders or something like that. So it's to me it's those situations of like, yeah, I'm stacking the Yankees, and I have three Yankee Hicks. They have 4 outfielders because there's a DH. They have 4 out of 9 of their batters are outfielders, and all their outfielders bat 2nd through 6th in the order. Now I'm sitting there going, is this long-term optimal to do? If I had to make a choice of one or the other, not comparing like a specific slate. Obviously, on smaller slates, I don't mind playing 3 from the same team because the opportunity cost is lower.
Of course. Yeah.
So, like, I just intuit, like, from just directionally act, whatever you want to call it, like, it seems to make sense based on the probabilities of those estimates. It makes sense that it's more likely that you'll need that one-off outfielder that's outside of your stack than the stack putting up enough points where 3 outfielders from the same team. Yet, if you go back in CSVs, there are plenty of slates where the winning lineup in the large field GPP has 3 outfielders from the same team. 3 Reds outfielders, right? Because the Reds put up 15 runs and all their outfield, all their outfielders score, and it's not like all their outfielders scored a ton of points. It's like one scored 24, one scored 20, and one scored 18. But the 7 other games on the slate, like no team scored more than 4 runs. And there was no out. There was one outfield that scored like 28 as a one-off, and he's 3% owned, and it just is not like you already have 24, 20, and 18. Like an extra 4 points for that price, it doesn't fit. Like there's no 40-point outfielder or something, and that wins. But it's how probable is it? And the fact that I could look at CSVs and see that most, if not all, sharp players are not considering this. So that always puts me at pause to go. I mean, Nerdy Tenor said it best. I love the way that he describes things. It's right at my alley. That if you're the only one doing something, either you're a genius or a moron. Like there's no in between, right? Because why? Because obviously, from a free market perspective, it's the same thing of like I have an idea for a restaurant in town because there's no restaurant like this. It's like there may be a reason because people have tried and failed. Like that's why there's none of them, right? It's not because everyone is stupid and they didn't do this idea. So I feel the same way with that type of thing of like, but it's also the type of thing where if it is an error, it doesn't. Here's how I view it. If I'm right, I get a bigger edge than how much I lose if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, because I'm still making plus EV lineups even with only 2 outfielders. I'm just locking myself out of if a 3 outfielder from the same team lineup wins, I can't possibly have that lineup. And how much of a leak is that? Not as much. But if I'm playing, the frequency of my lineups that don't have 3 outfielders from the same team in mind is much higher than the fields. Exploitatively, right? I'm gaining. So if I am right, I gain more. And if I'm not right, I don't lose that much. Doesn't
Yeah.
that make sense? Was that a
does
good
make
way of
sense to me.
explaining it?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because you can, I mean, maybe you'll be blocking yourself from the best lineups or from, stacks that go completely off with all the outfielders doing the majority of the work. But I agree that you're probably losing less if you're wrong than you are gaining if you're right. Yes, I think that makes sense.
Right.
In this example, not in
right.
every example, but in this particular example.
I think in the other end of the spectrum, I think here's something that you don't see sharp players do in MLB for larger slates. I'm not talking about 3-gamers. That playing a batter against your pitcher.
Yeah.
So let's say you erred on the other side of saying, I think there's an edge in allowing one batter against your pitcher. You look, especially in the beginning of the year, pitchers are only pitching 80 pitches. Half the game is against the bullpen. And going, I'm going to purposely put a negative correlation into my lineup, right? Because this batter is probably going to be facing my pitcher twice, right? Maybe even 3 times. And it's like, how much edge do I get from having a more unique build? That's like, you're not going to find many lineups that look like that in the contest. Right. How much edge do you gain by doing that in baseball? Probably very little.
Yeah, I would say not a lot.
Right. So,
and if you're gonna have unique lineups anyway.
Right. And if you're wrong, if you're like, no, the negative correlation is definitely worse, right, than having 3 at bats against that, because if he hits 2 home runs off your pitch, now your pitcher's dead, right? Yep. And if it well, what happens if he gets 2 at bats versus the bullpen? Like, how much is that worth? Like, you're more likely to have too much downside in doing that than the amount of edge that you gain from.
Yeah. That's a good counter example. Yeah, I agree with you that even if you are right that people underplay the pitcher against batter in a large slate, you're not going to gain a whole lot. So yeah, I think that's a good counter example of where it's not worth trying.
I like these conversations.
Yeah, these are interesting conversations.
If we consider this podcast to be a conversation, most of the comments are, how come I didn't let Neil speak for that long?
I feel like I spoke a good amount this time. I tried to, get more words in.
Yeah, you get your shit in. You since you came on in the beginning, you've been able to get your shit in.
And there are weeks when I don't have as much energy. I'm not really ready. I'm not prepared to interject. I felt like today I was a little bit more energetic. I've been putting together this chair for the past hour. So, just
is that a new chair?
Already? Oh, yeah, this is a brand new chair. It's a Secret Lab. I saw in my interview with RBX88, he had a Secret Lab chair, and I was like, that chair looks extremely comfortable. So I asked him about it and got a recommendation from him and just put it together. And so far, I like it.
Is it comfortable?
It is, yeah.
I've thought about getting a gaming chair, but chairs are so, like, to me, like, I don't mind. I could buy anything else like sight unseen, but it feels like a chair is at the price point where it's like, I don't want to spend $400 and then be like, I don't like, right, I don't like the chair. Like, can I sit? I'd rather go to Office Depot, and then they don't have those types of chairs. So gaming chairs in general, like, what makes it comfortable?
This one, it sort of forces you to have good posture to some extent. Like, it's a little bit more upright. It's also pretty soft. You can lean back. I don't know exactly what makes it comfortable. It's doesn't feel like there's something creeping up my ass. Like sitting on hard chairs while I was visiting all weekend, and your butt kind of gets sore after a while. I don't feel like this is going to happen with this one. Pretty soft seat. So
how's the ventilation?
The ventilation. I don't think there's a lot of ventilation. It feels like it's leather or pleather or something. Okay. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of ventilation.
Okay, because like my chair, like I like the chairs that, like, I have a chair. I like mesh.
My last chair was mesh, and I actually really liked that chair, but it started falling apart pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, mine. I'm missing an armrest on one side. Yeah. Right, which it doesn't matter. I don't rest my arms.
This might be a better winter chair than it is a summer chair. I'm probably going to be super hot in the summer, but so far it's comfortable.
Right, but I like the mesh chairs. It feels like it's ergonomically enough. No, and summer it doesn't feel like I would get sweat there because it's. I mean, you could see through it, and then the back is also mesh.
Yep.
Right, and then it leans back, and it just feels like. But the thing is that it's not it doesn't have a high back or anything like it's not one of those that's like straight up type of things. And it's like, it would that be better, or do I prefer this style?
Yeah.
I don't want to spend $400 and be like, nah, I'm just going to use the chair, the $80 chair that I've had for 5 years.
That's the risk I know. So part of the reason that I did this is, so I had a mesh chair that I loved, and then my parents were over one day, and my mom saw my chair, saw it was falling apart, and she was like, "Oh, well, we're actually getting rid of our old office chairs, and they're really great chairs. They were not heavily used." And I remembered having sat in their old office chairs that I found them really comfortable, and I was like, "Yeah, I would take one of those chairs. I'll just sub that out." So without thinking about it, I gave them, or we got rid of my old chair. They brought one of their old office chairs here, and it turns out I no longer find those chairs comfortable at all. So for the past like 3 months, I got rid of my mesh chair way too early when I still loved it, or still liked it, but it was kind of falling apart because I remembered those chairs being really nice, and then I sat and it was creaky. It's not that comfortable. It's just like I feel like my back hurts all the time. So I was ready to make a switch. So I just ordered this after Gio gave it a high recommendation, said that yeah, it's the most comfortable chair he's ever sat in. I thought, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. At least I have a recommendation from somebody I know, and so far I feel like it's nice.
People recommend those types of chairs. I mean, I see most DFS players
Yeah.
kind of have those types of chairs, but it's like, it's one of those things like, for instance, I can't wear Nikes at all because my feet are flat. My feet are flat.
Okay. Yep.
So like my whole life. I mean, of course, I came from like kind of the punk hardcore scene, so I was used to wearing like Vans, Airwalks. Anyway, but skateboard shoes are intentionally flat because that's to keep your feet on the skateboard. Even though I didn't skateboard, but like, like when I'm 12 or whatever, it's like, oh, I'll go to the shoe store and, with my mother or whatever, it's like, cheaper Nikes or whatever. It's like, it's uncomfortable because I don't have an arch and the whole thing is a fucking arch.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, everyone else is wearing Nikes. It's like, well, it's highly recommended for someone that has an arch in their foot. And then they probably someone like that that has a high arch would look at Vans and go, I don't know how you walk in these because they're like, how do you walk that flat? And like, because that's the way my feet are. So like, I view those chairs, especially like I do have a spinal condition. Like the whole point is that my spine can't be in that posture.
Right.
So I'm like, do I spend $400 to find out that I can't even lean my neck back to hit the fucking back anyway?
Right.
So what's the fucking point to begin with? It's like, now I have a chair that has a flat back that it doesn't even matter because I'm hunched forward. I can't do anything other than be that.
Chair.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's comfortable for me. Comfortable enough so far. Right. We'll see if I still like it after a few days. But I've got it. I feel like it's gonna stay together at least. I think.
Does it have the heating stuff? Does it have does it heat?
No.
I've seen somewhere like you could heat the. I don't know. I thought about getting a chair. Right? Did you get the 300,000 crown thing? Right.
Yes. I thought about getting a chair for that. That was kind of what.
Yeah, I was looking at that also.
Yeah.
They had 2 chairs. They had 2 chairs available or something. It's like, what? Why don't I just do this and get the worst case scenario? I just got it's essentially free to some extent.
Right. Yeah.
But then I gave the thing to my wife, and she wanted the fucking HD photo printer. So okay, there. I mean, it's one of those things where if I wanted the chair, I would just fucking buy the chair. Like, I'm not getting a free chair. Like, I view the 300,000 crowns as it's like $350,000.
Right.
It just has to be spent on this in the store. So just don't buy something for the sake of buying something. It's real money.
It is. Yeah, I ended up buying something for the sake of, to some extent. So I got a new iPad, which I have sort of wanted a new iPad just because my old one is so old and not that great. But it doesn't even come with phone capabilities of connecting to the phone. So I don't know. It's probably not even a huge upgrade. I'll probably never use it. But it was the last day I hadn't found something. I gave it to my wife for a little while, and she couldn't find something that she really wanted either. So she was like, you should just buy something. So on the last day, I was just like, all right, I kind of want an iPad. I guess it's a good enough value. A lot of the stuff in there are like $20 items. Like, I don't want to waste this on a $20
right. That's
item.
I told my wife, I purposely said, put the minimum crown to be 200,000. Like,
wait, could you
Yeah,
Because
on the search filter on the side.
I didn't see that. Okay.
Right, because because the thing is, once you enabled the offer, every item would say eligible to be claimed. Right, one, and so you didn't even know what the value of every item was. So what I did is I didn't log in and sent it to my wife and say, put that in, and then I'll do it on my side, and you tell me what item it is. Because with my wife, if you took off the crown thing, she'd find some pencil set for her crafts that are like 5,000 crowns, and be like, oh, I want these are the $40 pencils that I know that
nice pencils.
Yeah. Right, those are the nice pencils, and I'd be like, dude, we have 300 we can't buy it's not like if you were able to spend 300,000 crowns in general and get bunch of, then that would have been one thing, but like don't just fucking waste it on goddamn pencils.
No, yeah.
Worst case scenario, I was like, I'm going to buy the most expensive thing that I can resell on eBay. Right?
Yeah, right.
That's how much of a fucking nit I am, right? I'm like, what is the highest resale value? Like, I'm not going to buy a chair and then ship it off to someone. It's like some little electronic thing that'll come in the box. Won't even unwrap it. I'll just list it on eBay, right? And just whatever it is, and I'll send it off and I'll get the money. Same thing for, did you play the Onyx tier NCAA bracket?
Oh, yeah. I got tied for 22nd.
Oh, okay. So how much was that?
Yeah. 2,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, considering the team that I had in the championship was Kentucky, who lost in the first round. I had Kansas versus Kentucky, so obviously Kansas won, so that helped a lot.
How many bad brackets were there in that contest?
I think a lot of people did what I did, which is I opened my DraftKings app, I saw this thing popped up saying, fill out your bracket for the Onyx tier, and not knowing a single thing about any of the teams other than their seeding, I just clicked through, 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, and then after that it's kind of random. It was kind of my approach to it, and I think a lot of people probably did the same thing. Or maybe just like the smart people who played it smart lost out this time, and the people who had no idea what they're doing kind of got lucky.
Because I mean, essentially, I think 90% of Onyx players automatically cash just based on
the number of entries. Yeah,
right, the number of entries. So once I saw that, I did the most efficient thing that I know how to do. Just pick the favorites in every game.
Yep.
Especially with the scoring system, because it's like predicting a first round upset is only going to score you 10 points, but missing out on a Final Four team of 160 points is like just all the favorites. Like if I do all the favorites, I'm probably not going to be in the bottom 10% of people that don't get anything, and I may be in the middle somewhere. I ended up with $150.
Nice.
But like I said, I'm a crown nit. I'm a rewards nit. I'm just like, what's the easiest way for me to get? I won 14 cents in the WrestleMania one in the pools. Because they were promoting that. So I'm like, okay, who's going to win this? And what's the finish? Whatever like that. I'm going, okay, it should be. Then blah, 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 blah. And of course, whatever it, I mean, you're competing against like 35,000 people, like just whatever. And it turns out that I won 14 cents. It's like, okay. Okay, I'm nice. That made up for the $16 margarita at the stadium, right?
Right. Nice. Well, I'm doing my first MLB show today.
Oh, okay. Oh, what on Awesemo?
Doing shows at Awesemo.
Okay. MLB is so much easier to discuss strategy than NBA.
Yeah. So I haven't looked at it at all yet. I feel like I should sometime between now and when the show starts in 2 hours figure out like which stadiums are the best now and figure out that kind of stuff.
Just look at projections.
But that's not how the way I play is. I'm typically just looking at top stacks tool. I mean, that's like all I look at. Top stacks tool, top pitchers tool. I don't even look at the projections. I just look at the stacks. So it's
right, because the rest of the lineup is just going to be filled out with whatever. I
mean, the projections, the projections do it for me. I don't need to look at the projections because they're just going to build the best lineups for me. So
what are you going to say? Are you going to be like me? Just look at the projections. There you go.
Yeah, I'm probably going to say. I mean, so my thinking is I'm probably going to talk about which types of lineups I want on this kind of slate. So if it's a large slate, I'm going to want a 5-man stack on DraftKings, 4-4 or 4-3 on FanDuel, that kind of thing, more so than. And then I'll probably get questions about individual players, and at that point, I'll look at the projections.
Right. But also, like tomorrow, the types of line. Can you build 2 stud pitcher lineups, 2 cheap pitcher lineups? Can you pay up for the Dodgers stack? Can you like construction questions of like, this stack has this team has a 5.8 implied run total, but in order to stack them, they have a DH that's a first baseman, so you have 2 players that are on DraftKings that are both first base. It's hard to stack this like just the
Yeah.
way that positions go around. It's like yeah, they're good, but they may actually be less optimal. You may play some of them, but like to me, it makes it more interesting that way than NBA,
Yeah.
where you could be on at 5 o'clock Eastern and be like, you know what, anything that I say an hour from now may mean nothing.
Right. Yeah. NBA, I told them I couldn't do live before lock. For baseball, I am doing live before lock. I don't think I'm going to have any issue creating lineups while doing a show. It's just so easy. But also in the short term, so tonight it actually leads up to lock, but because of the conflict with NBA, a lot of the live before lock shows are going to be 2 or 3 hours before lock anyway, so shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, because you could probably do MLB even with some of the West Coast teams with projected lineups. It's not going to change like
Right.
the top stacks, the stack percentages, unless like Trout sits or like, and typically that's on Sundays if anything. So what? So Osmo's what? So they're doing like a 4 o'clock. MLB
Yeah, something
show.
like that. I actually haven't looked at the exact schedule yet. I know tonight.
You're on the show and you don't even know what time it is.
2:30, I want to say 2:30 to 3:30, something like that.
So that's close. So you got to get out of here then.
I'm actually I have a meeting in 1 hour with to discuss the kinds of things I want us to talk about on the baseball shows.
What kinds of things?
How to structure the
shows, the format of the show.
Yeah,
right.
Format,
like what types of things? I don't know. Baseball.
Right.
Talk about chairs. You could talk about chairs.
We could talk. I mean, you can go off the rails. We do it all the time. Tomorrow I'm going to be hosting, so that one is going to be interesting. I've never had to host a live show before. This will be so. I'm hosting the High Stakes podcast, but that's just it's not live. I'm not fielding questions or anything. Tomorrow's gonna be my first time. I'm gonna have to be like trying to read chat while discussing things. I don't know. We'll see if I can handle it. I'll find out tomorrow.
and weeding out the people that are stupid in the chat. Yep. Welcome to my life.
Yep.
Just discuss chairs. It seemed. From what it looks like, you went with the chalk chair.
I did. Yeah, I definitely did.
And I have a leverage chair.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a good description.
I'm a chair contrarian. You could call it a chair-trarian. A chair. I'm not going to make that the title. It's going to be something. It's going to probably be chair contrarian.
I can see the wheels turning in your head.
Right. I'm trying to get the two words together, and it really doesn't. It kind of doesn't fit. Kind of close. Close. It could fit.
Close. Yeah.
Okay. So Neil, people could find you at PlayerQ DFS on Twitter and High Stakes. You the good thing about your podcast is that it has its own feed.
It does. Yeah.
Right. So if you subscribe to, you go on iTunes or wherever, search for High Stakes DFS, you will find it. It's also in the main Awesemo podcast feed, but you'll also get 700 other shows and picks and everything. I mean, like it's just nonstop. Every show, every video, everything has its.
There's a million of them.
A million of them. You could do that also, but at least it's like one is. The thing is that your show a lot of times comes out way earlier on the main podcast, on the main Awesemo feed than on the High Stakes feed.
Oh, really? I had not noticed that.
Yeah, on this past episode, like the Nerdy Tenor interview, like was like on that feed like 6 hours before or what? I don't know. Maybe an RSS refresh thing, and I don't know.
Yeah.
People
there
are
were
publishing
issues
it different
this week.
Right.
It didn't come out exactly.
But I also noticed an episode before where it was like it came out like a full day.
Yeah.
Before, and it's like, well, why am I waiting? Like I'm just gonna listen. As long as I don't accidentally delete it, because no offense to the Awesemo podcast feed, but 90% of the stuff I don't listen to. Yeah. Right. I don't need the prize picks thing and the whatever.
Yeah.
I go through and just and when it's like, oh, okay. I'll leave the NBA strategy show there. Maybe I listen to it. Maybe I don't listen to it, but it's there and I put it on. Or sometimes I listen to it and then I don't realize that I ever even listened to it because I'm doing other stuff. So yeah, I constantly have podcasts on. So but your show, but the interview shows are the ones where like I'm not doing anything. Right. Typically those are shower and shave podcasts.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Good time
put it
for
on in the shower. You take a 10, 15-minute shower. You shave, like, it's like a half an hour for that. Then you get,
driving.
right. I don't go in it. The
Driving.
bacon, it's a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit time. Put that in the
Sure.
microwave, whatever. And then you also have the fall asleep podcasts. The fall asleep podcasts are typically podcasts that are interesting, but too long.
Okay.
And they're typically not DFS. They're typically political, or I have some wrestling podcasts where it's like it's a 2-hour podcast of like all the things the past week in wrestling type of thing, where it's like, yeah, I already know what the hell. I just want to hear the commentary. And if I only catch 20 minutes of this and then fall asleep, I ain't going back the other. It's whatever.
Yeah. I don't have those because I would not fall asleep if I'm listening to something, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
it wouldn't work for me, but
yeah. My pocket casts. It's probably scary. There's let's see stats. Since July 27, 2016, so that's almost 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to 610 days worth of podcasts.
Wow. That is an insane amount of podcasts. Okay.
I spent almost 2 years listening to them.
and that doesn't count the time that you are doing podcasts.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, but I also have
this
the save. No, hold on. Because of variable speed, because I listen to podcasts at 1.2.
Yeah, sure.
I've saved 121 days.
Okay, nice.
And from trimming silence, which is a feature, so like if there are pauses with no audio, like it just cuts those off, I've saved 72 days.
Wow.
Of just making sure that if there's a pause, just like talk a little bit faster. And 44 days worth of skipping.
Nice.
And that's not audio. That's I just walk around, I go around my house and skip a bunch. Obviously I'm a hardcore podcast listener.
I can tell. Yes.
Right. Because it's just on all the time. It's just on all the time. Like that's why it's like 600 days worth of podcasts. It's not me like listening intently to podcasts.
Right. Yeah. It's not the only thing you're doing.
Right. That's like okay, podcasts are on 8 to 12 hours a day, and maybe 2 to 4 hours of it is intentional listening.
Yeah.
But high stakes is one of those intentional listens.
Appreciate that.
Right. And I would hope everyone else's that Theory of DFS is their intentional listening. But from some
that was for me before I was on it every week.
Right.
Now
but some people are like, oh my god, it's 2.5 hours long.
Right.
Right. Like it's like, well, what? Right. The Nerdy Tenor one was what? That was almost 4 hours, right?
It was
3 hours.
3 hours.
Right.
Because that was the one that broke my record. I had the record for being the longest guest on Theory of DFS at just under 3 hours, and then he went 15 minutes longer.
Right. But still, the Nerdy Tenor, you went over 2 hours with him?
Yeah.
Right. That's your longest podcast.
It is, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So you'll be back on in 2 weeks. I may. I wanted to tell you before, so it didn't feel like I was cheating on you. Because I told you about Cardi. I may bring on some more guests.
Nice.
Like, because we're on like a bi-weekly every other week. Because there's only so much that's going on to just shoot the shit about.
Yeah.
So like, and people are asking, it's like, I want to say, some people are like, Neil is boring as fuck in the YouTube comments, but I don't care about those people. But some people say, I liked it when you had guests on and had interviews and talked with other people, even though they're not really interviews, it's just me having someone else on. So I may on the
I enjoyed
other
those
weeks
when you had random guests. And
Okay.
I always enjoyed Eric as well, but it's still fun to kind of get to hear from other people.
Right. So I may in the mix because once NFL comes back, I don't mind doing every week.
Right.
Because it's something because it's the NFL season is so much more popular. The downloads and the views go like 5 times more. Wow. And people don't mind talking about, we just did, the Sunday slate and you only get like 18 of them. So it's like to review the process and all that type of stuff is much more interesting. We're going to get into July. If we did this as a weekly show by July, it would be like, is baseball ever going to be done? Like, what are we going to talk about? I mean, people that probably get sick of us talking about MMA past, couple of months.
Yeah.
But the concept still apply to anything. So I don't want to mix it up. But I didn't want to like say, well, I'm looking for new people because Neil's too boring. I don't find you boring, Neil. I don't find you boring.
I appreciate that.
Right.
I think you and I have fairly different presence in the show. So maybe people who come here for Blender, then they see this guy who doesn't talk nearly as much, isn't as animated as I can see those people finding me boring.
Yeah, but there's other people. There's other people that are the opposite. There are other people like, dude, can you tell me to shut up and let the other person talk?
Well, some people think that then I kind of balance you out. Like you kind of, kind of bring it down to my level a little bit when I'm on the show. So, you can't please everybody, right?
Right. And on your show, you're actually a good host.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, because it's not about me and me. I'm just used to like, I'm just having a conversation. If I end up talking for 20 minutes straight, that's just the way it is.
That's what people come for. Yeah, people come for.
I don't know. Do they? I have no idea. The listenership goes up. I don't know. Is it maybe people hate listen? Neil, I do hate listen to some podcasts.
Yeah, I know. I know that a lot of people do.
Right.
Yeah, it's not something I have the patience for, but I know people do it.
Okay, so are you gonna during the MLB season? So you're on the show today. Obviously, this comes out. It's already happened.
Yep.
So are you going to regularly be on MLB shows?
Yep. So currently, I am scheduled to be on Monday through Wednesday, and Tuesday is the only show that I'm hosting. So I'm going to be with different people each of those days.
Okay.
Yeah, Monday through Wednesday.
And that'll be regular. Like you'll be on like 2, 3, 4 times.
Yeah.
It's obviously high stakes and everything. So you're getting you're building up. I remember the conversation we had in DMs a while ago about like I'm interested in maybe doing a little bit of content or whatever, and you're like,
yeah.
And very, very similar approach to me. Just whatever. It's kind of like, I'm here, whatever you need, I'll fill in and do whatever. And then next thing you know, you have 9 shows a week, and you're like, oh my God, like, didn't get into.
I don't think that I'm at the point where I want to be ramping up too much. Like this to me, hearing that they want me on 3 days a week, I'm like, yeah, it sounds about perfect for me. Just like three shows about baseball, and then I'll do high stakes. I'll do this show every other week or so, and then I don't think that I'm really wanting to do full time like a lot of people. I don't understand how people can do this all day, every day. It seems like to me it's taxing to do it too much. But it seems like a good amount of content for me for now.
Right, and eventually, if you get to that point, this will be the first show that you drop.
I mean, it's the only one that doesn't pay me.
Right, that's exactly the point I was going to say.
It'll be the type of thing. It's like, so I don't know.
unless you're going to pay me, I'm going to do the other stuff.
Yeah. No, I enjoy it. I enjoy the show.
There's no pressure, at least.
Yeah, there isn't. Yeah, that's true.
Right, there's no pressure. There's no like, oh my God, it was a horrible show, Neil. I'm going to have to let you go.
Prepare for this show. All the other shows, I feel like I need to prepare ahead of time because like they're paying me, people are watching. This show, you don't tell me what we're going to talk about. So there's like no mental preparation for doing.
There's not even a mental preparation even when we connect. It's kind of like you connect and I go, you ready? Okay. We don't even say hello to each other, right?
No, yeah.
You good? Okay.
Jump right on. Yep.
Right. Well, that's what this type of show is. So we'll be getting some more guests on. I may tweet out like some if you have suggestions. Right, feel free to tweet at me for obviously people that have not been on the show before, or unless you want to see someone again or something like that. So just tweet at me at BlenderHD or email, questions@theoryofdfs.com. You could always submit questions or ask me anything you want to that email address. And as always, if you want to pick up the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, it's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass that you could find at theoryofdfs.com.